Welcome back to another episode of How I Made My First Comic Book. This is episode 3, and I'm going to dive into how I ink my pencil pages. Episode 1 was the script. Episode 2 was taking that script and penciling pages from the script, and I'll make sure I link to all those videos below in the description. But today I want to really dive into inking, the process, the tools I use, and give a little bit of an example of some of the pages that I've inked in the past. Today I want to start out with the tools that I use, and there's a wide variety of inking tools out there. You know, people use microns, which are like a felt tip pen, varied sizes. There's brush pens, there's quill pens, there's brushes. I mean, it's the range is great. A lot of people also use digital. Now, I will say that I am one of those people that really believes in more old school pencil to paper, ink to paper. So my process is maybe a little bit different than what's out there. You know, like I've said in prior videos, like this is just my process. So hopefully you can find something interesting or some tips or tricks or things like that. But generally speaking, this is how I've been doing things for years. I will start out by taking my penciled pages, scan those in. I used to have to scan them in 2 sections and piece them together, which was very tedious and time consuming. I've then since upgraded to an 11 by 17 scanner. That's one thing I didn't really address too much in the beginning, is the size in which comic books are made today. It is typically drawn on 11 by 17. I use Bristol board, 300 smooth if I'm not mistaken. And I basically will use that, scan that in, and then we reduce it down to the proper size for whatever the specs are for the printer. Usually it's around 67% in reduction. So you can get quite an amount of detail on the larger pages. The only thing is it could be a double-edged sword where you're getting a lot of detail on 11 by 17. When you shrink it down, you may end up losing some of that detail or the finer details. I want to start with showing you some of the tools that I use over the years and go from there. I used to use this old school pen, which is just like a precise pen. If we can see what this is one of those, like, you buy it at Target or wherever, you know. I used that for a long time, and I was able to, you know, do some line variable weights and things like that. The thing with inking that's a little bit different from penciling, as a lot of you may see pencil pages and then you see like the final inks, especially with Jim Lee and Scott Williams. Jim Lee is pretty loose with his pencils. For the most part, a lot of the stuff is there. A lot of the shapes are there, the cross hatching, the, you know, anatomy, backgrounds, all those things. They're there, but they're pretty loose. And Scott Williams, you know, the inker's job is to refine those lines, to, you know, create depth with your line weights, thicker, thinner lines, things of that nature. So that's what I try to do with my pencils. And we'll get to some examples here in a little bit, but I keep my pencils relatively loose. I do that to try to speed that process up, but yet have enough detail there, have enough anatomy and shapes and shadowing and all those things to really convey the overall feel I want for that page. So it's important. It's an important balance to have everything there, but don't spend so much time making sure your pencils are super clean and, you know, every little line is there. I have the luxury of being able to ink my own work, so I typically will add a little bit more detail, or I will add all those line weights and do all those things when I ink the page. I know with the dawn of digital inking now, a lot of artists will draw things digitally, and therefore you don't necessarily need an inker if all those things are there and defined. Even people that, artists that still use pencil to paper, they will do their pencils so cleanly that you can scan them in and just literally kind of darken them up in Photoshop and do some things in there to clean up the lines a little bit, but also to get them to be black. My process is I like black ink. That way when I see fans, I can give them the option if they like the penciled pages or if they like the inked pages. They're both available. I also do some things, and I'll touch on when I go into the coloring episode, why it's so important for me to scan in black pages. And even if you do it digitally, the process will be the same. So we'll get back to the tools here. I typically will use Copic markers. I like them. They're reusable, they're refillable. I use these multi-liner pens. This is a 0.3. Again, it's refillable. The tip is replaceable. I like something that I can just spend maybe a little bit more money on, but I'm able to like reuse it and keep doing those. And I have that. I have a few different sizes of markers that I use. So we're talking a 0.3, 0.5, and a 1 are typically the sizes I will go to. They can be, it can be a little tedious, I guess, with trying to build up line weights with smaller pens. And for that, I end up using this guy here, which is, it's kind of hard to say. I'm not even going to try to pronunciate it, but it's this, it's a felt tip pen, and there's a soft and hard tip. And these things, you know, they have that tip, and it's really nice for inking for me. It allows me to really get that almost brush look, or that quill pen look. It allows me to go from very thin to very fat lines. It allows me just to be even kind of loose when I just am like throwing down lines, and they're just very erratic and not necessarily defined. I do that with a lot of rock details. Certain details I just will like dot in some things. The larger Copic marker actually is nice because it's two sides. It has the fat side, and then it has the this side as well that works pretty well for if you're familiar with comics, the Kirby Crackle. I've done that before. And that fatter tip works really well, the brush tip. But what I want to end up doing is going into an inked page from issue 1. This is all about issue 1. This is my first comic. So here we are with issue 1. And this is page 1 of issue 1. This is the inks. We can show the pencils here. And I'll zoom in a little bit to kind of see what I'm talking about when I talk about potentially adding detail or doing different things like that. You know, we have on the building, we have some lines here. It might be a little bit hard to see. I know the pencils aren't the darkest, but then again, these are pencils, they're light. They get scanned in, I darken them up a tick, and then I blue line them so that I can ink them. And then, you know, this will be the inked pages. So specifically, like in this area here, let's zoom in a little bit more, there we go. In this area here, you can see there's a couple different lines going vertical, kind of on that perspective angle. And then you have these lines coming this way. Same thing down here. You know, you have some almost cross hatching in a way, very loose, very sketchy in a way. And then here I took out that line there, and I took out the line there. So, you know, it's just a matter of what I want to do with inking, you know. And then again, I'm super zoomed in, so this is very, very small. What we're looking at here ends up being an inch or two wide by maybe an inch or two tall, so it's very, very small. And you can see even here, you know, some of the things I've changed. It's just down here, you see the lines down here, and then even some of these lines here, some of the detail up in here. It all gets refined. It all gets line weights. And this is before I really started pushing line weights. I know in my more recent artwork, I really tend to push the line weights. And I've kind of gradually gotten better at pushing what's in the foreground, making those lines a little bit thicker. The outlines, the character outlines tend to be a little bit thicker, and that helps the character stand out from what's going on in the rest of the page. Here we see what is actually kind of the first appearance of Annabelle's mom. These are memories that we haven't really defined yet, is what those memories are for Ice Pick. This was shortly after the attempt on his life, and he was left for dead, so he's very much still trying to figure everything out. But we can see here that, like, you know, there's some detail changes, there's some refinements of the line, specifically down in here. You know, you can see where I just went with straight lines, and, you know, prior I had a couple horizontal lines and vertical lines. Even in the building right above that panel, I ended up doing some things up here a little bit different. So these are some things that I take into account when I'm doing a page. We'll zoom out here and go to the next example I want to show. And this is page 20. This is page 20, and it's a 2-page spread. You can see Freak's hand there. trying to swipe at Ice Pick there with a knife, and he's dodging, and he knocked over like a barrel of flames. They had a fire going, kind of like the things you always see in movies where it's just like a 40-gallon barrel and they have a fire in it. Spawn did a lot of this, I think, if I'm not mistaken. He showed some of these things. If we zoom in on this, let's zoom in on his face a little bit, be able to see a little bit better. Can look at the detail in Ice Pick's hair, the detail in his mask, the detail within the rubble and the flames. I will show this color page where it really brings this page to life. To me, I feel like black and white is good. It takes a very specific type of black and white artwork to really hold a black and white page. If you're only doing it black and white, in the 70s there was a lot of black and white horror comics, but those were very unique artists that were able to really capture a scene only in black and white. For me, I like color. I really enjoy coloring, and I think coloring really can bring your page to life. It can also ruin it, to be fair, but I feel like with this I added some fire, and it really brought this, and some lighting really brought the page to life. But we can see with the detail in Ice Pick's face here, some of the things that changed. His hair, really defined the hair and added some lines up here that really helped to define the hair. We filled everything out. So it's this balance of constantly deciding, should I add detail? Should I take it away? What should I add? What should I not? And as we move through the page here, we can see Ice Pick's face, and how does that look? What got changed? What got refined? His hair is a big thing where, a lot of it got really cleaned up and refined. Even within Freak's kind of arm in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that things started to be defined. Ice Pick's hair was defined. The blacks and the shapes there really got defined. So overall, when you look at this page, you can see it looks good as pencils, and you can really see what's going on. But once the inks hit, you really start to see, okay, there's shadows here, there's hard shadows, there's contrast. How are these things all playing off each other? And that's really the job of an inker. When you're doing pencils, you really want to consider like the light sources of things. You want to define those light sources. And I think when you're inking, you want to almost ramp up those light sources, because once you have something that's black and white, it really can give you that high contrast. I mean, black and white, it's the highest contrast. So when you see someone do cross hatching, or they loosely fill in some blacks, it's up to you as the inker to define, do I want this to be solid black? Should it be solid black? Should it just be more cross hatching that fades out? That's one of those things that you always want to pay attention to. And the one thing I tend to do also is, it's like the squint test, is to take a step back and say, okay, I'm looking at this page here. What, as the artist, as the writer, what's the most important thing? At the end of the day, like if someone else gave me a script and I'm writing off their script, I will read the script and I will look at that and say, okay, what are the key components? Composition, all these things matter, right? But is character A the most important character on the page, or in that panel? Is character B the most important character? What characters are the most important? Maybe it's a background, maybe it's a car, maybe it's an object. And to really try to make that object the most important thing. And that's where line weight plays a big factor in it. That's where shadowing can play a big factor into things. Maybe the character in the shadow is the most important thing, but then everything else around them is well lit. You have this shadowed character. So there's, just a handful of things that, as you start to, build your own comic book and write out these ideas, you don't need to be a stellar artist. I mean, the anatomy is not perfect. There's a coming to terms as an artist where you always want to strive to be better, but in the same regard, you want to do the best that you can at that moment. And that's one thing that's, as an artist, is really hard to accept, that you're never going to be perfect. I mean, it's just, that's the way it is as an artist. You will never be the perfect artist with the perfect anatomy and the perfect perspective, and even with all the tools that help us. I know Clip Studio Paint, and I'll get into more like in the coloring video. setting up colors and programs I use and things of that nature, because it's all done digitally. I've done some coloring with markers, but I'm going to focus more on like my first comic, which was done digitally. But at the end of the day, like, it's just you're never going to be perfect, and the sooner we kind of accept that, the sooner we can strive for perfection, and we get better and better. And I even look back at like at this my first comic book. We're talking like years ago. It's almost a decade now, 2026. So yeah, I mean, it's been about a decade since it's been published. It's been a little longer than that since I was drawing this page. And I would say that at the end of the day, like, if I were to redraw this, I see things that I would change. I see things with my pencils that I would change, with the script that I would change, and even with the inking for this video. Like, I would ink a little bit differently. I would come in here with ice pick and I would make these lines the outlines of ice pick way thicker, and I'd really push him in front, and I'd push Freak in front. I would push all the things with Freak down here in him, like with this line. I would push all these things in his hand and his arms, and just generally speaking, the outline of the characters, I'd push that with a thicker line weight to pull that forward more. So it's a learning process. Being an artist is a lifelong learning process. It's constantly looking at references. You can look at a lot of artists and how their styles have changed and adapted over the years. Some artists, they stay true to how they were 20 years, 30 years ago. But I look at like what I want to do as an artist and how I built my comic. It started from an idea. I was able to research what a script looked like. I wrote a script. I followed that script as the penciler. I enhanced those pencils with these inks. And then I enhanced those inks with colors. And we'll get into lettering, will be another video. And then I'll probably wrap up this series with like a final thought, pre-production and pre-press and all that other stuff that a lot of artists don't necessarily think of. With the inks, what's important is your tools. Okay, get good with your tools. All the stuff I've mentioned here, the pens, couple bucks. I think the markers are like $3, maybe $6 now with inflation. I think I bought that years ago, and that's just a testament to how long things last. I bought that black marker years ago, and I use that to fill in all my blacks. It's pretty good. It's a nice fat marker. The felt tip markers that I use for all the line weights, I just kind of randomly started researching like what other artists use. I came across those. I mean, they're only a couple bucks for a 2-pack. There's a hard and soft tip, which is interesting because you'll feel like when you start to use them, there's a definite feeling of a harder tip versus a softer tip. I mean, to really start inking, it's not that expensive. It's still relatively easy to get into, and it just takes practice. It takes practice of being able to do those long lines that are consistent, or the curves. I mean, that's the other thing. I as this video goes on, I start to think of other things, and templates I never really talk about too much as far as French curves and circle templates and things of that nature. I have used them. Sometimes I do use them for longer lines if it will work, but I know like if you're using a brush with like actual India ink, it's really hard to use those templates. So to me, that's where the real skill is, to use a brush, because you have to throw pretty much everything out the window, because that ink will seep under your templates if you're not careful. For me, using a felt tip pen, the ink it does bleed a little bit, but it tends to stick kind of where it's at, and I can compensate for that bleed, and I know that bleed is going to be there from the ink. But so I really don't use templates too much. Sometimes when I'm penciling things I will, but then when I go back to ink, I just tend to, over the years, I've gotten pretty good at like freehanding a lot of the curves, a lot of the longer lines, a lot of the line weights. It just comes with practice. So this is one of those things where I hope there was something interesting here for you. A few of the examples from issue 1 of Ice Pick, page 20, and then here's page 1. Again, I hope that this was informative. I hope that I didn't ramble on too much about things. But I get passionate about it. I love drawing. I love inking. In the early days, I didn't really think about line weights, and I didn't think about, the separation of foreground, midground, and background. So as you get older, as I got older, and I start to look at like professional inkers and what do they do and what makes them so good, I started to really pull that into my own inking and my own kind of toolkit. Hope you found this video informative. So stay tuned, and I will see you on the next episode.